Somebody in the back?
Yeah, I'm at a health system, and we have partnership with a clinical research group. And as the IRB person or HRPP person at my institution, we sign the IAA. And, it says at the bottom I'm supposed to, fulfill my duties of the FWA. Now, most of these projects get sent to an external IRB, commercial IRB. How do I go about like getting the information? I mean, before I took on this job, they signed global agreements with these external IRBs, and now I am completely left out of the process. And I thought that, my FWA means I know the person, the PI is qualified, that they don't have any conflict of interest, and that they know how to report. But I don't get that information from this clinical research group.
So,
I mean,
we have, for lack of a better word, master agreements with various organizations, but that doesn't mean that a PI at our place can send a study to that organization without us agreeing to it.
right, and we have an agreement where we exclusively go to them.
So one of the things that's pretty commonly done now, and I think translates into this situation, is that even with global agreements, that each individual study has to be reported through the HRPP. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have them fill out a whole application.
No, and that's,
Right.
I don't want to duplicate
Like-
anything, but I do need to know who
Well,
at my institution
Yeah,
is doing what.
You could even be like, send me an email with the PI name and the study title for heaven's sake. It's kind of up to you how much information you feel like is valuable at your end to have. But I think that I agree with you. It's not possible for you to fulfill your end of the bargain without having some sort of information. So when we're looking at regulations, contractual requirements, and value of doing certain procedures, I can see all three of those get met by you having some sort of notification process that lets you know anytime a new study gets submitted to this external IRB that you have record of it.
Yeah.
We don't review the entire protocol. We look at that form and the consent form, and that's what we have for documentation purposes on our end. It's very helpful, and it saves a lot of time on both ends.
I mean, you have the right to, you have the authority to request information even if you're not going to review it
Yep.
officially. And again, it's still, we approve a study going to one of those external IRBs. The PI doesn't do it without our knowledge. That's inconsistent with our policies.
And again, I think it's up to you to decide how much information you collect that will ultimately have value for you as the HRPP, even though a single IRB is doing the review. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, because of our signed agreements, you have the right as the relying institution to access information about the study. And so it is okay to say, I'm not going to keep this consent form on file because the single IRB has it. That's okay. You get to decide, right? But the point of today's presentation is to encourage you to be flexible about what you decide you're going to keep and not keep.
And the final slide is think about your auditing process as well. Obviously, if you have a for-cause audit, you pull no stops, you do everything that you need to do. But think creatively about your process of not-for-cause monitoring, post-approval monitoring. Come up with a rationale for it. Follow that rationale based maybe on risk. And if you want to study more and more minimal risk research, as we do because of the end of the expansion of exemptions and the end of continuing review for minimal risk research, We instituted a post-approval monitoring process for them in which it's not like what our auditors do for a clinical trial. It's substantive, but it oftentimes does not involve personal interaction other than communication and exchange of documents. We do desk audits. We're also, thinking of a way to do triage it. Okay, we get a little bit of information, and then we say, does this make us comfortable? If so, we're good. If it makes us less than comfortable, we ask for another set of information. So, triage it, because again, if it's a minimal risk study, the risks are minimal. And approach it in that way. And we ate up 10 minutes of
We ate up extra 12 minutes,
Okay.
but we can keep going. We're ready for the next one, please. Because you're ready to just keep hearing from us.
Yeah, boy, this is real punishment after lunch.
Thank you for sticking with us. We hope we're being helpful.
And we apologize for starting late, but the previous set of speakers just really were rude and overtook their time.
Yeah.
Now we're going to move, and this very nicely follows a lot of the stuff that Yvonne talked about this morning in terms of the consent process and the consent document, as well as some of the stuff we were talking about, thinking how to do things differently with greater reflectivity, with greater understanding, with greater sensitivity, and so forth. So we're going to talk about, and this will be a little bit different. I'm going to talk, then she's going to talk, so you have to keep me to time. Because we did different things in this same area. So, we want to view some innovative examples that make consent documents more readable and understandable. We want to discuss the need for flexibility and experimentation, and consider HRPP approaches for facilitating and encouraging the use of consent document innovation. We know that the consent must provide complete information. It must be understandable, and because misunderstandings have consequences. This is a guy on the island going like this, and the pilots say to one another, "He always gives us such a nice wave." Obviously, a bit of a miscommunication, and that has consequences. And similarly, we hear not quite as dramatic, but significant things with HRPP stuff. So again, it must do those things, but it also must be practical for the research teams to implement. We can come up with an incredibly creative consent process and consent document, but if the research teams do not have the knowledge, don't have the time, don't have the resources to make use of it, it's going to be like that report that simply goes on the shelf and nobody ever looks at it and uses it. So it has to be practical. You have to come up with a way of doing the process that allows it to be actually successful. And here it says, maybe we should stop making them on a hill. The idea is you do things where you can do them and that have impact, that you want them to have impact. So, we created a pilot. And then we also, and I'm going to talk about that, and then we are creating out of that pilot a new pilot that already has begun to be initiated. And actually, if you really, I'm going to go over the process and less the content's in the slides and so forth, but if you really want good information about it, talk to either Beth or Jill. You're somewhere here. Is she still here? Oh, Jill. They were people who were heavily involved in this pilot. And again, not only must it be informative and stuff, it has to be engaging, right? There's nothing, you don't want to read it, you don't pick a 33-page consent document to read before going to sleep, but you don't do it in order to have an engaged reading. You want to engage the person, so that is creative as well. This is our original template. And originally, our first pilot was, how can we make those first 3 pages of a long consent document better? And for those consent documents that are only 3 pages or so, or that are short and don't need a concise summary, how can we make them better? So, we had the traditional format that everyone else does. So what we did is we asked for volunteers under Beth's leadership to work with research teams to come up with alternative ways of doing either the concise summary or the full consent, making use of visuals, making use of graphics, making use of illustrations, making use of something other than, words. The goal, again, was to come up with it. So here's some of the examples. This is a full revision of the consent, was reduced from 6 pages to 2 using this type of imagery. Pictures and then descriptions underneath it. And again, it was our staff person working with the research team to decide what to do. And we gave them free hand. This is all their work. And so the idea is they came up with alternatives. And the research teams loved it. But of course, they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have necessarily the technology to do some of this stuff. So with our staff, they were able to do it. So this was the full revision of a consent. This was another full revision of a consent. Again, this is about a biobank, about that process, to show images of what they can expect to happen, what will happen with what they donate, et cetera, et cetera. This is more of the concise, a way that we did that. Just images and description to help explain that. Again, another one, this is the study summary. It was a 30-some page consent document, and we use this as a way of doing the concise summary to really capture it quickly, in a different way, what they can expect. Another example. Again, different staff working with different research teams came up with each of these different models. For example, in that way. So we liked it, but we didn't want it to just be on the shelf. We shared it with research teams. They liked it, but there's nothing that they could do with it. So starting this fall, we are dedicating research staff. We're picking about 3 academic units who we think would be supportive, who have the resources, who have the commitment, have enough research going on, and have enough infrastructure to actually do something with us. We're picking 3 of them. We're meeting with the research leadership, getting them to agree to participate in this second pilot. And what we're going to do is have staff work with research teams on the actual development of consent documents, either the